Welcome to Ask the Expert on Contingent Workforce Strategies LinkedIn group. And I have a really awesome, and I think very important topic to talk about today. And what makes this even more awesome is I have an awesome person that I'm going to be chatting with today that knows this topic inside and out, and has such an interesting background and experience to be the expert on this topic and provide us some amazing advice today. So the topic is digital transformation on an enterprise scale. And I know a lot of my audience knows who's talking, but I'm going to introduce her anyways, and maybe you'll learn something about her background. But it's JoAnne Estrada, and thank you for coming on today to talk about this. JoAnne has like 25 plus years of experience
Yes.
in the contingent and staffing area. She's been on the MSP side, working for large enterprise organizations on the services side. She's been on the client and the buyer of enterprise contingent workforce staffing services and other types of services. And, over the past number of years, she's been, in charge of digital transformation at large organizations. So, JoAnne, thank you for coming on today.
Thanks, Jeff. And I appreciate the introduction. Wow. I don't think I could have done a better job. Thanks.
Well, we've had lots of good conversations over the years,
Yes,
and this is why, it's just amazing that we kind of reconnected and said, hey, why don't we talk on this topic, right? So, um,
indeed.
digital transformation, right? Like, it's a really cool word, both the digital side, because it's kind of innovation and technology, and transformation, which, has lots of kind of meanings. Let's talk about the definition of digital transformation. Kind of, what is digital transformation, and can it have different kind of definitions for different size organizations, right? Too, like,
Absolutely.
talk to me about some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I chuckle about is it isn't new, right? And I think you and I have had conversations around how we started in this industry. So we'll touch on that a little bit. But really, digital transformation is really a strategy in which you're looking at your processes, your business, and saying, okay, how can we apply technology or digitization against how we're doing things today? And I think that says a lot because it does require you to understand what you're doing today, right? And think about where you can apply a strategy to bring a technology enabled way of doing some of these things. But then I would put a little caveat to that and saying, maybe at the same time, you're not taking a process and saying, okay, great, let's take this process and do it in technology. Because you really need to rethink about, should that process be the process when you're bringing in technology? Because it could look very, very different. But coming back to the definition is really a strategy to look at the way you're doing things and how can you transform it by bringing it into a more technology enabled way. I think you and I caught up, Jeff, and we both laugh about this because again, it's not new. I'm going to age both of us, Jeff. I'm going to age us both, right? We started back in the day where we were faxing resumes to customers as a recruiter, right?
I was in my office and there was a person rolling a cart of a stacks of resumes, right?
That's
And
right.
then be
Yep.
looking through resumes. This is before search engines or ATSs or anything like that, right? Like,
Oh,
so
yes. I mean, every day the mail came in and we received these resumes, or, we had our fax machine where people were faxing our resumes and then we were faxing them back, or we had our sales team that were actually going to the customers and dropping off these paper resumes, right? And then fast forward, I was working at a recruitment company again many years ago, and the internet, right, came about. So I had a job title that was called the internet recruiter. So we actually, instead of manually doing what we were doing, as you and I just described, we were now doing that through a technology that enabled us to allow for the jobs to be posted and allow for us to get emails of attachments for resumes. So transformation isn't new, and I think that's one of the early ones that I experienced personally. And I'm sure, Jeff, you've got a similar story around, how you have been engaged in some digital transformation, and it kind of goes on, of course, where we're going to talk about this topic today.
No, it's amazing. And that's one of the things that you have to think about, that the process was there, right? And the enablement and creation of efficiencies is important, right? Just
Right.
building technology to digitize where you're not taking the process and making it more efficient actually is problematic. And in some cases, we see organizations build technology for the sake of building technology to say it's cool, and maybe for the enterprise value, if they're a tech company that just was funded by a venture firm, that actually isn't enabling the existing workflow to be more efficient, right? And so,
Right.
when you look at it, here's a person and here's the job, right? How do you get that person in that job more efficiently and through the recruitment process, and then that ongoing, relationship and managing that project? So, that at the end of the day is the workflows, and then it's making those workflows efficient and then enabling it with technology. It's so
Yeah, and
important.
if you think about, that workflow and the various different, touch points, there's, multiple personas that you have to think about, right? We're talking today about the recruitment or the sourcing, but you have to think about, every aspect and every persona. There's the talent persona, there's the recruitment persona, there is the buyer persona. And in that buyer, it's the hiring manager, it's the procurement organization, it's HR. So it's looking at, an enablement through digitization or technology that could improve upon the process for each and every persona. So I think that's one of the things also you have to really think about, what is the problem we're trying to solve, and how does it solve it for each of those personas?
Yeah.
Change management alone is huge and very, very challenging, right? So there's the enablement, regardless of the size, really, around, let's be inclusive, let's think about around, what we're doing and what the problems are that we're trying to solve, building out our requirements, what systems we are, what do we allow for, what our buying behavior is, what is our culture, versus not being inclusive in that area. And that's one of the things that I would highly recommend to any organization. Be thoughtful around, what are the problems that you're trying to solve, being inclusive, but not too inclusive. You don't want 1,000 people in your
Yeah, too
core
many cooks
team.
in the kitchen doesn't move things along either, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's some of the things that, we've constantly advised. And I think also at the same time is there are decisions that are made where, you have a certain ERP system, right? And those are some of the considerations also. What are the systems that we have today that are not going to be included in this talent acquisition, digital transformation, but they have to be included in terms of this is the requirement that will allow any types of APIs or any type of, development to be a total workflow process. So those are the good ones that, of course, would really look to transform. And then, of course, we can always talk about how change management is so complex and difficult, but there is a good way to do it, and I've seen it done very, very well, and I've seen it done not so well.
And then from a smaller organization perspective, like I mentioned, it was an equalizer for me as I grew my
Yeah.
company. But how does some of the smaller organizations you've seen kind of take a look at using transformational systems or digitizing in order to either compete or, pivot into a different market, or, have you seen some in the perspective of smaller organizations?
I think sometimes the smaller organizations can be a little bit more nimble,
Yeah.
right? I think you would agree, right? In
Yeah.
your experience of smaller organizations, they can be a little bit more nimble. I do, often say you still need to kind of think about what is it that you're trying to deliver, the opportunities, what are you trying to solve for? And a smaller organization may not have the experience, the knowledge, the expertise. So oftentimes bringing an advisor in, right? Bringing someone who can consult around what the art of the possible is, but then also meeting them where they are and talk about what that journey could very well look like. And I think there's many of the advisors out there, of course, you and I included, that have the subject matter expertise that can help with some of the small companies. I did see something recently, Jeff, and it could have been on one of the most recent analyst reports, where 61% of organizations are going to do some sort of digital transformation with Gen AI. So it's here, and I think those that are going to be really evaluating their internal organizations to think about what can be part of the strategic digital innovation effort are going to see more success than some that may not be thinking about that today, perhaps.
Oh, for sure. And it's interesting. I look back at, and I've had conversations with organizations on the smaller side that look to use bigger enterprise technology than what they're probably at now, and or they look to add a bunch of apps to their tech stack that they don't have the resources to implement often. And it's
Sure.
not just the knowledge, they don't have the implementation, and then it actually slows them down because they're implementing out of the box solutions that actually complicate that, hey, job person to a job process, because you're putting in too much information into a system, or there's different workflows that are taking in different directions. So it's been
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, and I'm sure when we talk to organizations, whether suppliers or enterprises, it's not everything has to be turned on today, right? It can be a journey. Where do you see your biggest opportunity to get the value of some sort of digital enablement with your culture fit and your processes, and perhaps some sort of financial evaluation, and then build that journey and build that roadmap, right? Not everything has to be turned on today. It's where are you right now? Meet yourself where you are, and then kind of build out that use case around what should be done today and what can be done, in a proper roadmap.
Yeah, you're so right. And almost taking it back to that change management, knowing the culture of your organization, knowing kind of if they're ready for this transformation too, is so important, not only to the adoption, but just the success, right, of a program. Like some of the best contingent programs I've seen, they wanted to implement the VMS, and it was, hey, I can use all these bells and whistles, or hey, let's phase this in and just capture people into the VMS without a lot of rigmarole, not even doing the billing, just to identify all the workers that they have that were
The
in scope of
visibility,
that program before
right?
turning on billing. That becomes more complicated, or let's call it statement of work, which then you get in front of a procurement process, etc. It was just, in order to get paid, you got to go through this system, and our accounts payable is going to check that that worker's in the system. And that allowed that inclusiveness, everybody being adopted without complicating it with all of the other bells and whistles that a VMS can bring to the table. And the
Yeah,
political side of things as well, if you get in front of the procurement process of things, right?
yeah.
Let every
And I think
manager use it, but we'll just identify your workers, right? And then,
exactly. And, in that change management piece, in your example, I think we talked about being inclusive within your organization, because they actually become the advocates
yeah.
as well. I was part of it. I was included in it. yeah, this, we had something to do with it. If I'm a recruiter, I become that advocate to other recruiters. Or if I'm, procurement or HR or TA, or a hiring person, you become advocates. So I think it's a very important piece of the puzzle and around, any type of transformation that an organization is doing.
So thinking about this, where do you start, right? Especially in a large organization. And you can talk about small organizations too, but in a large organization, where do you start? Because there's so many moving parts, especially when you come to talent acquisition, contingent, workforce. How
Sure.
does that get decided, right? And I kind of
Yeah.
comes to mind a business case, but how do you even decide what goes into the business case to digitize, right? And how do you
Yeah.
start to work that through?
Yeah, and I think that can be answered in many different ways, but I do, I've seen in, my experience on the buyer side, enterprise buyer side, as well as, on the supply side or innovation side, it does come down to a business case, right? A lot of organizations do require what that business case is. Now, in order to provide that business case, where are you today? Where are you? What problems exist? What opportunities to align with your overall strategy as an organization would align to this effort? The market being what it is today, I think we're all, aware of how challenging of a market it is right now. So financials also come to the table. So building out what that business case is, and who's going to make those decisions within an organization to give that thumbs up to either go RFI something or evaluate the marketplace. So understanding who also you need to get that thumbs up is critical as well. So understanding what you need to include in your business case, how internally things are decided to either move forward. Is it financially driven? Is it risk driven? In contingent world, there's a lot of risk, right? So is that speaking volumes to an organization? The lack of head site visibility, is that speaking volumes to an organization? So building out where we are today, what the organizational, strategies are and the opportunities are to bring along a more digital process and what that would be in terms of efficiencies, talent experience, hiring manager experience, and clearly allowing for the user community to be able to get things easier, quicker, and in a way that is beneficial to all. So how can you build out the business case is going to be the priority number one.
Yeah.
And it's funny, Jeff, we talked a little bit about this. AI is not new,
No.
right? It's clearly not new. Now, Gen AI, of course, has elevated the topic that we're talking about today, which I am very happy about. I think you, myself, and many of us in the industry have been talking about some of these topics for years upon years, right? And I think the emergence of Gen AI has really pushed where people are really now thinking, oh, we are getting some traction here. Now is the time to do it. Not only in our space, but because jobs are changing, the way organizations are structuring themselves are changing. So I'm excited where we are right now
And
because
the lack of talent, right?
and the lack of
And
talent.
I'm not saying people aren't talented. I'm just saying there's a shortage because it's demographic, right? At the
Yeah,
end of the day, there's less people to do the same amount of work, right?
there is.
So
Yep.
we better get more efficient in how we do it, and the technology and the innovation and digitization is so important. And
It really is.
that I think the AI and AI coming to the forefront is going to help with that in a big way too. And you're going to see a lot of investigation into those technologies that will help us to do more with less people, right? At the
Absolutely.
end
And
of the day.
just a small little nugget. I've been obviously advising in most recently, and part of what I do as an advisor is I want to understand what the application process is with some of these large companies. So I've applied, to many roles, to large brands and large organizations. And there is a huge opportunity for digital transformation across the board. Some are very, considerate around the talent experience. Some maybe not so much. I'm receiving I'm receiving some job notifications for jobs I'm clearly not qualified for, either more qualified or not qualified for. So this area is a huge opportunity for just about all organizations out there.
Oh, for sure. And from your experience in helping organizations with their digital transformation, how do you learn about what to transform? Is it internally, I got this big problem, and then you go out and try to find a solution? Or is it you scouring the marketplace, always being curious and researching, and then go, oh, here's a product to solve a problem that we kind of didn't know we had, but as soon as you mentioned it as the vendor, hey, yeah, we do have that problem, and then you internally investigated the issue and went, oh yeah, we do have that problem to solve, and started to investigate and transform. Like, what's the
Yeah.
mix of you going to a lot of conferences and being curious and research and hearing from the vendor community versus an internal problem that you had to go out and research the solutions?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both. First of all, you clearly need to know internally how processes are managed, right? The number of resources it takes to do a certain activity, how many systems are having to be used. Is it through APIs, or do I have to log into 15 different systems? And I have in the past, right? I have, and I'm sure you have as well. But really, you clearly need to understand what all that entails, and of course your culture and your policies, if you will. But then also there is a level of what is out there. As you stated, I've taken a look at a lot of technologies in all of the roles that I've ever had, doing a market assessment of what's out there, using analysts, participating in webinars, those types of things, going to the events, to clearly hearing what there are, because you may think about only your internal view of what your companies do, but the best thing you could do is also think about the art of the possible, right?
Yeah.
What are other companies doing?
Yeah.
Maybe you're not experiencing a challenge that a technology can solve today, but you could very well see that tomorrow, right? So it's about, I feel as though it's a balance of both, because you can't be so inward focused that you're unaware of what's happening out there, right? So it's definitely a benefit to be able to do both.
Yeah.
If you don't have the team to do, again, there's many analysts or types of reports out there that help with various different ways of knowing how many technologies can do talent acquisition work, or internal mobility type of work, what they currently do. So there are ways that large organizations, or even small ones without the number of resources that they could need to do that they have access to.
No, it totally makes sense, and we've seen each other at a lot of events that are thought leadership events, and different vendors are presenting on their new technology or solving problems, etc. So yeah, it's been good. So we talked a little bit about the business case, right? And starts with a
Mhm.
business case, and then trying to get that approved. What's the magic around increasing the probability of getting these things approved within
Ooh,
organizations, especially large ones that different stakeholders have different political views
that's
and
tough.
priorities? And what's some of the magic to get it approved? And then, there's, yay, we got the business case approved, but to actually hit your goals, you then have to look at adoption of digital transformation and
Yeah.
digital strategy that you've just built.
Yeah, I definitely think it's going to be different from organization to organization. And, if it's too far of a stretch for an organization to say, yes, we are going to go do this, and the end result of this getting approval is we're going to completely transform talent acquisition process for the contingent. We're going to, get a VMS. We're going to do direct sourcing. We're going to bring in voice agents. We're going to do, redeployment capabilities. We're doing everything. Sometimes some organizations, what I've seen is their approval process is more, we'll say they crawl before they run, right? My business case is I want to at least go out to be able to investigate what the art of the possible is for us to be able to solve what would bring an enormous amount of value for our organization. So really internally looking at, how can you get that business case approved? And oftentimes it's not going for the stretch, right, to the run. You want to do the let's crawl first, get that approved, understand what it's going to take to get to the walk process of approval. Great, we got that. Now let's go to the run. Now I would caution anyone to take too long, because there are some things that are just moving so fast in our industry that are really going to, I would say, leapfrog some organizations to be ahead of the pack. So be aware of what other organizations are doing and how fast that they're doing it.
Yeah. The word pilot often comes to mind in adoption and proving it. So you get it approved.
Yeah.
Approved as and it kind of follows that crawl, walk, run strategy is, hey, we got it approved. Here's what it's going to look like, but let's pilot it in a safe manner, especially when you're talking this larger companies. Let's pilot somewhere that's safe. Let's work up some of the bumps on the road before we scale this across the organization and have a bigger impact. And that's a riskier proposition. So instead of that big bang approach, which sounds good to get a PO for the $1 million contract, but sometimes it's better to be successful in a pilot and roll it out. Have you seen the big bang versus the pilot approach?
Definitely, in a pilot, and I'm not necessarily a fan of the term pilot, but it is what it is. Pilots, oftentimes people think, well, if I don't like it, we're just not going to do it. Yeah. Right. So in a pilot, let's define what makes the pilot successful. And it doesn't necessarily mean that success means I'm going to place 100 contingent workers, in a X time period. That's not necessarily what success is, right? So clearly define what success is. It could be we've managed a way to make sure that the hiring manager talent experience, can be done in a X way. So I think, defining success is critical. The other thing that I often, require in any type of pilot is on we'll call it the buyer side, or if it's even within a supplier organization, there must be an accountable, responsible party, whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4, making sure there is a team that is accountable to the actual pilot in working with any of the vendors, and that governance structure around that, because it's not one-sided, right? You can't just turn on technology and hope that it works. I mean, nothing works like that. I turned on Amazon and didn't start buying stuff for me. And I actually had to go buy stuff, and trust me, I'm a great Amazon customer. But I mean, it doesn't work that way. So making sure that there's a clear governance, that there is, an enablement through a, accountable, responsible party, and then a time frame. This pilot will need to be defined as success 1, 2, 3 in a defined area. And then if, at that point, a stage gate process could determine what those next steps are.
Yeah, no, and you're right. Sometimes pilots do let the decision maker off the hook to say, I can just let it go if it doesn't work out. Whereas it should be well defined that if this pilot does work out, what's next? And here's the next steps and the gates and how it gets rolled out across the enterprise. No, it's interesting. So like we've talked and we've spent, we're going overtime here because this is an awesome conversation. So I'm just going to go overtime and make an executive decision.
Well, I'm glad you can do that.
But to kind of wrap it up, there's a couple more questions. There's two sides of this, right? There's a buyer side, and then of course the innovators side. And I always kind of wrap things up with if I am a buyer of contingent services, or, the digital transformation person or tasked with
Mhm.
that in our organization, and a buyer of contingent services that's looking to transform, where do I start, right?
Oh,
Where do I start, and what should I be thinking about to prepare as I move through the stages of digital transformation?
yeah, yeah, great question. It's as easy as do your homework,
Yeah.
right? Where internally do you feel as though, I remember being on the buyer side. I mean, I went out and did interviews with, my buying community. I went out and did interviews with legal. I did interviews with HR, and that at times can be very challenging. I remember sitting in front of my legal counsel and say, I'm thinking about bringing in an MSP with a VMS, and they're like, MSP.
Yeah.
So you have to define that, right?
Yeah.
Because a managed service provider could also mean I'm going to outsource this,
Yeah.
and my legal counsel actually used this term. Oh, so if I want to hang a door, that's an MSP as well. I'm like, well, sort of, but we're talking contingent labor, right? So
Exactly.
I went out and did the interviews. So making sure that you do your homework internally around, how do you feel, how do you buy, what policies do we have, those types of things to again be able to do that, and then go do your homework from a market perspective, because there's so much available information out there, especially with digital transformation. I think when Gen AI first came about, a year and a half ago now, I guess, when ChatGPT, came about. Let's not talk about, LLM, existing and AI existing. It's not new. But I remember that in our staffing world, it's like, oh, job descriptions, we can have a new job description. I'm sorry, that's table stakes anymore,
Yeah.
right? I mean, if you're not beyond that point, you may be already behind the ball relative to digital transformation, because that is table stakes, and there's many technologies that do that as one of their solutions that they're offering in the bigger realm of things.
Yeah.
So know where the market is to be able to allow for those conversations. So I think those are some of the things, Jeff, that I would highly suggest on the buyer side. I also think on the supply side,
Yeah.
especially with emerging technologies, a lot of founders don't come from our space. Some do, right? Whether a true staffing supplier, right? And they're trying to solve for staffing, or maybe they have, experience in other areas of TA, et cetera. But oftentimes when I speak with emerging technologies, they only know what they know, and I would highly suggest that they do a little bit more homework,
Yeah.
because staffing is hard. Talent is hard, and we're not solving to purchase widgets. Right? It's not, I'm going to buy nails. We're dealing with people. And there's that multiple personas that we talked about before. So really understand what this industry is all about. And I know some people don't like the term industry, but it is clearly, an industry of, talent acquisition, talent management, the entire human capital area that we're in. But really do your homework, making sure that you understand solving for an enterprise may be so different than solving from a supplier to solving from a services organization. There are different ways that you want to position your solution or your technology, depending on who you're speaking with. If you're selling to someone like me who's on the services side, you have to understand that I serve multiple customers, right?
Yeah.
And you're not selling to an enterprise. So just be aware, and don't assume that a talk track is going to work if you haven't done your homework on who that organization is, how they're buying, and use Gen AI or ChatGPT or Bing or any of the ones to do your homework on that organization and know what is going to really speak volumes. But then the last thing on that is, don't assume you know everything about that customer.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting because we've seen this convergence of technology and staffing, where staffing is digitizing more, and the technology guys that, and that are VC backed are coming in with this disruption mantra, but often are not coming from our industry, and they end up putting people behind the technology curtain, and they're looking a lot similar, where manual staffing agencies are digitizing and digital platforms are manualizing behind the curtain for what the original, product team didn't account for when they designed this. Oh, we're just going to disrupt the staffing industry with a platform, and they're having to put manual processes behind that to account
Or
for what they
backtrack.
missed, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
backtrack. And I'm a big supporter of emerging
Yeah.
technologies. Like, that this space, we're behind the ball in terms of being able to, automate and digitally transform. There we go. The topic of today. So we are quite behind, and I'm a big advocate for technology. I know we use the term disruptive, but they are truly going to empower how we are transforming our organization. So let's not be afraid of the technology, but be aware that they are transforming how we're delivering our services and our value proposition. If we are, I'm using me as being on the supply side, we're going to transform the models in which we're delivering services and think about new ways to bring additional value to the industry or to our customers. So I'm a big advocate. I really feel as though they're empowering. Yes, disruptive, but also empowering at the same time.
100%. I love the empowering or the enabling kind of labels, right? That digital transformation is enabling the process to be more efficient.
That's
And
right.
so I think that's where we're going to leave this topic, JoAnne.
Nice.
I know we could talk more because we have sat at various conferences and talked for evenings on either this topic or others, but I can't thank you enough for the conversation. So informative, and once again, I think it's going to be very helpful for a lot, both on the buy side, contingent side, large service organizations, and the innovative suppliers that are bringing new technology to market. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff.